Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller film named Halabala. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with Officer Dan, who is a hard-nosed cop in the Bangkok police force. He despises all evil and will stop at nothing to punish criminals. His wife often pleads with him to be less violent, reminding him to think about their unborn child. Dan always agrees verbally, but when it comes to a case, he goes back to his old ways. During one arrest, he accidentally shoots and kills an innocent girl. To quell public outrage, Dan is transferred by his chief to a remote border village. His wife is utterly disappointed in him and doesn't speak to him for days. In truth, Dan is also tormented, his mind constantly flashing back to the horrific image of the girl's death. After moving into their new home, his wife begs him again to give up his violent ways, suggesting they could live a peaceful life there. However, Dan is fixated on getting transferred back to Bangkok, believing that cracking a major case is his only ticket. His wife scoffs at the idea, pointing out that it's a poor, remote area with no major crimes to solve. She then pulls out a dagger and holds it to her own stomach. Dan is terrified, but when he snaps out of it, he realizes it was just a hallucination. One day, Dan gets a tip from an informant. A criminal has escaped prison and fled to this very region. If he can pass through an ancient tunnel in the jungle, he'll be able to cross the border into Malaysia. Dan's heart skips a beat. This is the perfect opportunity he's been waiting for to prove himself. His perceptive wife seems to sense something and desperately begs him not to go on another dangerous mission. But Dan is dead set on capturing the fugitive, promising her he'll be back within 3 days. Knowing her husband's stubborn nature, she finally relents. Before he leaves, she gives him a bottle of antidepressants and repeatedly reminds him to keep his promise. Pressed for time and unable to wait for official orders, Dan finds his friend and has him pose as an officer sent from Bangkok to request assistance from the local police. The local officers don't suspect a thing and are eager to help, but their faces fill with terror when they hear the target is hiding in the ancient tunnel. A bald officer explains that the tunnel lies beneath the village of Halabala, which, though long abandoned, is considered a forbidden place by the locals. Dan dismisses their concerns, stressing that it's an order from headquarters and asking if they want to lose their jobs. After much hesitation, the local cops agree to go, but on one condition: they must hire a hunter as a guide. The best man for the job happens to be in their jail cell, locked up for illegal hunting, but he knows the Halabala area better than anyone. When he learns of their mission, the old hunter gives them a chilling smile, telling them they're heading to hell. And so, the 5 officers led by the old hunter set off for Halabala village by Tesla boat. With a long way still to go, the hunter begins to recount the history of Halabala. He says it was once one of the world's most lush rainforests, home to countless legends, the most terrifying of which is the tale of the Halabala cannibals. They lived in caves, resembled unevolved apes, and preyed on villagers and tourists, offering the leftover skulls to a demon. The surrounding villagers, fearing for their lives, banded together and wiped out the tribe, not even sparing their livestock, and burned the village to the ground. But even though the village was destroyed, the demon was not, which is why the area remains forbidden. As darkness begins to fall, the group finally arrives at the rainforest. The hunter doesn't rush. Instead, he takes out an incense stick, but as soon as he lights it, it goes out. With a grave expression, he declares that the forest does not welcome them and they should come back another day. Dan, a non-believer, defiantly lights another one, but it too extinguishes without reason. Hearing the hunter's wild laughter, Dan's short temper flares. He pulls out his gun to make his intentions clear. They are going in, no matter what. The hunter's warnings are futile. He finally relents, picking up 5 leaves and stacking them together, saying they represent the fate of the 5 officers. He states he is only their guide and will leave the moment his job is done. The local officers are sweating bullets but have no choice but to press on. Along the way, the old hunter repeatedly stresses that this is a path of death and requires an iron will. He warns them that no matter what they see or hear, they must remain silent, or no one will leave alive. As night falls, the group decides to rest in a clearing. The hunter encircles them all with a red string, sternly warning them not to step outside its bounds under any circumstances. Sometime later, a strange noise awakens Dan from his sleep. He looks up in confusion to find that the hunter and the other 4 officers have vanished. Dan immediately raises his gun, only to hear his wife's voice behind him. He instinctively starts to walk towards his wife, but suddenly his ankle is grabbed. Dan jolts awake to find everyone resting in the same spot. What he saw was yet another hallucination. The next day, the group of 6 continues their journey. A heavy-set officer suddenly shouts, claiming he saw a suspicious old man in white. While his teammates are distracted, the officer darts off in another direction with Dan's friend in hot pursuit, signaling for the others to keep moving. It was all a ruse by the heavy-set officer, who just wanted to desert the terrifying mission. Meanwhile, the old hunter carves a mark into a tree with his dagger, and a mournful wail echoes through the air. The group looks closely and sees bright red blood seeping from the tree's bark. The hunter gravely announces that they have arrived at Halabala village and his job as a guide is now complete. Watching the hunter's grim face, Dan and the others feel that something is terribly wrong. At the same time, the heavy-set officer who ran off is making his way back when he hears an eerie laugh from the jungle. He cautiously leans against a tree to observe, when suddenly a steel wire tightens around his neck. His attacker is none other than the escaped criminal. The cowardly officer becomes the first casualty. Not far away, Dan's friend fails to find his colleague but runs into the old hunter, who is heading back alone. He anxiously asks where the others are, but the hunter remains silent. Cursing under his breath, the man continues his search. By now, Dan and his remaining men have entered Halabala village. The place has been abandoned for years, with skulls hanging everywhere, swaying in the wind, creating an incredibly eerie atmosphere. As Dan cautiously moves forward, he feels something touch his neck. He reaches up and finds a faint red mark. Just as he is about to warn the others, a gunshot rings out. It turns out one of the 3 local officers was a mole working for the criminal. In the critical moment, Dan's friend rushes in and takes a bullet for Dan using his bulletproof muscles, but the impact sends him tumbling into a cave, unconscious. When Dan awakens, he sees a tunnel stretching endlessly before him. He wonders if this is the ancient tunnel leading to the border. As he prepares to investigate, a loud noise erupts, leaving him dizzy. When he finally comes to his senses, he discovers a gaping, bloody mouth on his own arm. Terrified, he stabs it with his dagger without a second thought. The sharp pain brings some clarity, and he realizes there was no mouth on his arm, only the wound from his own knife. It was another hallucination. Dan quickly takes an antidepressant and rests for a while. He struggles to his feet and continues on, only to discover that while there are many passages, none of them lead to an exit. They are either dead ends or occupied by terrifying creatures. At this point, catching the fugitive is the least of his worries. He doesn't know if he'll even make it out alive. Meanwhile, the criminal and his accomplice have also arrived at Halabala. 3 bodies lie scattered across the village grounds. It seems Dan's friend managed to take out the traitor before he died. The criminal recognizes his fallen mole but keeps a smile on his face. He is very familiar with this place. He mutters something before the mask of the demon, then forcibly places it on his accomplice's head. Once the man is incapacitated, the criminal takes a large blade and decapitates him. He does the same to the 3 dead officers, and soon, 4 heads are mounted on posts. The criminal's lips move as if performing a ritual. At this crucial moment, the one-eyed old hunter sneaks up behind him. Before the criminal can react, the hunter strikes him with his blade, then kicks him into the cave. The hunter nervously peers into the darkness, only to hear a demonic roar. The next moment, Dan opens his eyes, with no memory of how he climbed out of the cave. As he's about to head back, the old hunter suddenly lunges at him. Dan shouts, asking if he's gone mad, but the hunter's purpose is clear. He explains that the criminal has awakened the demon, and now no one can be allowed to leave the village. Dan ignores his smelly bullshit, pulls out his bald gun, and shoots the old hunter dead. He runs as fast as he can out of the forest. After such a bloody and bizarre ordeal, Dan just wants to get home to his wife. After a long run, he finally makes it back to his living room. Seeing his pregnant wife brings him a sense of peace. All he wants now is to get some sleep, and he slowly closes his eyes. His wife happens to see their reflection on a screen and is horrified to see that Dan has grown monstrous fangs. Forcing herself to stay calm, she makes an excuse about needing to use the restroom and quickly leaves the room. She doesn't know what has happened to Dan, but for the sake of her unborn child, she knows she must escape. The next second, the fanged demon gives chase. In a panic, his wife slams on the gas pedal and crashes her car straight into a tree. Fortunately, she isn't seriously injured. Seeing the demon approaching, she quickly gets out of the car and continues to run. Using the cover of night, she hides in an abandoned house. Sensing the demon closing in, she has an idea and throws a can in the opposite direction. While the demon is distracted, she quickly hides in a van. However, her heavy breathing gives away her position. The demon violently jumps into the van. Mustering all her courage, she grabs a metal rod and stabs the creature. She then scrambles out and uses her feet to jam the door shut, holding it until the demon inside stops moving. The ordeal, however, induces premature labor, and she gives birth on the spot. When Dan wakes up again, he sees his wife on the verge of a breakdown. He immediately promises never to leave her side again. But his wife trembles and tells him that there is something evil inside him. Dan's eyes gradually turn cloudy, and in the next moment, he is back in his house. But his wife is gone. He feels something stuck in his throat, and after a few violent coughs, pulls his wife's necklace out of his own mouth. A wave of nausea overcomes him, and he vomits a black liquid containing clumps of dark hair. In the reflection of the puddle, he sees himself transformed into a demon. Dan finally realizes that he has been possessed by the demon. It all made sense now. He now knows why the old hunter was willing to die to stop him from leaving. Dan rushes into the kitchen and tries to use a cleaver to force the demon out, but his body is no longer under his control. With his formidable willpower, Dan tries to fight the demon for control, and his memories slowly become clearer. It turns out that the criminal was actually a descendant of the Halabala villagers. He went to great lengths to return and resurrect the demon. Unfortunately, with only 4 heads, he lacked enough sacrifices, which greatly diminished the ritual's effectiveness. It was only when the old hunter appeared that the criminal offered himself as the final sacrifice, completing the demon's awakening. And Dan, who was in the cave, became the perfect host. This was the real reason he was able to escape. In the end, the tragic Dan fails, his body and consciousness completely taken over by the demon. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.